वो जो कि जलवायु परिवर्तन की बहस को हर साल आगे लेता जा रहा है, इसमें अव्वल तो कृषि का और खाद्य सुरक्षा का कोई जिक्र ही नहीं है, और न ही भारत सरकार ने इसको आगे बढ़ा के रखा है। हम भी उसी ढर्रे में चल रहे हैं, वो जो हमको चला रहे हैं उसी ढर्रे में हम चल रहे हैं। तो किसने कहा था कि अकल को ताक पे रखिए, आप भी लाइन में जुड़ जाइए? भैया ताक पे से अकल उठा लीजिए, इस्तेमाल करिए उसका। इस्तेमाल जब आप करने लगेंगे तब आपको ये समझ में आएगा कि चाहे वो सोलर एनर्जी जहां जा रहा हो, पहले हम अपने खाद्यान्न को तो देख लें। सबसे बड़ी पिटाई होगी हमारे इलाके में, हाँ अफ्रीका में भी होगी, अफ्रीका को हमारी पूरी सहानुभूति है, लेकिन पहले हम अपना तो निपट लें, पहले हम अपना तो देख लें कि हमारी खेती को क्या होगा। और हमको प्राथमिकता से राष्ट्रीय स्तर और अंतरराष्ट्रीय स्तर दोनों पे खाद्य सुरक्षा और खेती को सर्वोपरि रखना होगा। It is imperative for India in its international positions and its national policy making to give primacy to the issue of agriculture and food security, with which livelihoods are connected. Agriculture is not just an occupation. There are several lakh people, several 100,000 million people who will never enter the market on agriculture, but whose livelihoods are dependent on that. And therefore it's not an economic sector, it is a survival sector. And before we look at our emissions, we should be looking at our food. And therefore, the one thing that I would say is that all our efforts must be geared to advocating with the government and with the international community. And I know that all of you have been extremely active in all of the UNFCCC meetings, and that the Beyond Copenhagen group has made its voice heard. I think the one statement that must go out loudly and repeatedly is that agriculture and food must become the subject of negotiation. Why? A rise of 2 degrees is going to mean a huge difference to the developing countries. From rainfall, from glacial melt, from changes in cropping pattern, is going to have a huge impact. A rise beyond 2 degrees is going to be catastrophic. And we know that the temperature rise is definitely going to go beyond 2 degrees. We're not looking at capping it at 2 degrees. So this must be put onto the international platform, that it is not a question of emissions. The question is that when temperatures rise beyond 2 degrees, the agriculture of the South is going to be devastated. It is not going to be an incremental reduction in agriculture. It is going to mean a devastation of cropping and food production if the temperature goes up beyond 2 degrees. And conventional wisdom in all climate change talks now are that we will definitely see a 3.5 degree rise in temperature. If we are looking at 3.5 degree rise in temperature, and we are still not discussing agriculture and food production on the international platform, then we need holes in our head. Because at the end of the day, the rising temperatures are going to make the cold, temperate north much more hospitable to agriculture. Think of the politics of food. We who are already on the verge of food insecure and food secure stand to lose productivity. The food surplus exporting nations are going to become, with a 3.5 degree rise in temperature, even greater producers of food. With this greater production of food in the temperate north, the entire balance of food production and those who control food is going to become even more adverse than it is today. And yet we don't have a strong intervention on the international platform that agriculture and food security has got to be central to the negotiations on climate change. So I would like to just finish by saying that beyond Copenhagen must adopt this as an extremely powerful message that it must send out. And along with this message, I would say that one of the things that has not happened on the international level is funds for adaptation. Strangely enough, when the UNFCCC process began, between adaptation and mitigation, very smartly and very intelligently, adaptation became a national issue and mitigation became an international issue. So, we will have an international regime according to which you will have to cut down your emissions from agriculture and bring down the emissions from livestock and from rice paddies and pipapo. But anything to adapt our agriculture to climate change, to retain productivity targets, that has been left to national governments. Why? If we are still talking on the basis of polluter pays, then adaptation funds must be made available. So that when temperatures rise, thanks to the emissions of the north, and agriculture takes a beating in the south, that you make funds available for helping farmers adapt technologies, mechanisms, supports, loans, credits, whatever, to adapt their agriculture to that change that you have induced. So, along with the demand for placing agriculture on the center stage of climate change negotiations, will also have to be the demand that both adaptation and mitigation need to be dealt with internationally. And not that we get a policeman sitting somewhere saying, oh, everybody now get your livestock down and the ruminant methane emissions have to be down by this %. We say no. First, let us talk adaptation. You bring the rise of temperature, then we'll talk mitigation. So this is how I would say that we should handle. I agree, every negotiation is give and take, and I agree that every negotiation is about ceding space. But let me put before you the fact that today India, and I'm not sounding nationalistic, the fact that India is a powerful nation today and can make its voice heard in the community of nations, if we cannot negotiate on agriculture today from this position of strength, then we will never do it. I don't know how many of you here belong to the era of when the GATT was coming into the WTO. I know the faces that do belong to that era. But if you remember at that time, when we were negotiating the GATT, before it turned into the WTO, India was really, really in a very bad place. And we did not have the clout that we have today. The economy of India has changed, with that its political self-confidence has changed. And we made a lot of nonsense during the GATT negotiations. Our negotiators didn't have the knowledge, they didn't have the confidence, and we made a lot of nonsensical kind of agreements. But the situation has changed very dramatically. Our negotiators are much better educated today. Civil society has a much bigger role today and can input into international positions in all sectors. And India can command attention. Believe me, that if India were to dissent from something, you can't ignore it anymore. You can't say, well, tough shit. Somebody will come, a group of people will come and say, no, but why are you unhappy with this formulation? Should we talk? Should we have a breakfast meeting? Should we have a dinner meeting? Should we sit down and renegotiate this text? तो आज का भारत आज से 15 साल के पहले के भारत के मुकाबले में कहीं ज्यादा ताकतवर है। और आज का ताकतवर भारत, आज का आत्मनिर्भर भारत, आज का तजुर्बेदार भारत, जिसने कि उस गैट के जमाने से बहुत कुछ सीखा है, अंतरराष्ट्रीय स्तर पे अपनी बात कैसे रखना चाहिए और कहाँ हम पिटते हैं, उससे बहुत कुछ सीखा है। हमारे वो नौकरशाह जो जाते थे जिनको कुछ नहीं आता था, हमारी वो सिविल सोसाइटी और एनजीओज जो कि बड़ी दबी जबान बोल पाते थे, आज वो सब बदल गया है। आज वो नौकरशाह तजुर्बेदार हो गए हैं। आज उनको मालूम है कि इस तरह की अंतर्राष्ट्रीय संधियों में किस तरह की चीजें होती हैं, किस तरह की पॉलिटिक्स चलती है, कैसे आदमी अपना मोर्चा बनाता है, कैसे दूसरे के मोर्चे को कम करने की कोशिश करता है। हमारे भी लोग बड़े तजुर्बेदार हो गए, हमारी जानकारी बढ़ी है, हमारे अपने सिविल सोसाइटी के आप और हम और जो लोग यहाँ बैठे हैं आज बड़ी हिम्मत से और बड़ी जानकारी से अपनी राय रखने लायक है कि नहीं, हमारी नेगोशिएशन में ऐसा नहीं होना चाहिए, हमारे इलाके की खेती तो ऐसे पिट जाएगी, इसमें आप इस चीज को भी मद्देनजर रखिए। ये सारी चीजें बहुत बदली है पिछले 15-20 सालों में। और भारत की जो आर्थिक स्थिति है, भारत की जो अंतर्राष्ट्रीय स्तर में एक बलवान देश के रूप में जो इसको देखा जाता है, इस मौके को हम कैसे गंवा सकते हैं? आज का भारत, आज के भारत का जो समाज है, आज जो हमारे यहाँ जानकारी है, उसको सबको हमें उस दिशा में मोड़ने की जरूरत है कि ये भारत अगर बचेगा तो तब बचेगा जब हमारी खेती बचेगी। उसके बाद सोलर पैनल आप लगाते रहिएगा, लेकिन पहले खेती बचा लीजिए। मुख्य मुद्दा हमारी सारी रणनीति का ये है। धन्यवाद।
बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद सुमन जी। सुमन जी की बातचीत ने बड़े सारे इंटरेस्टिंग इश्यूज और क्रिटिकल इश्यूज एग्रीकल्चर और एग्रेरियन क्राइसिस के संदर्भ में हम लोगों के सामने लाया है। I would propose that whether it will be a good idea to have the entire discussion on agriculture now and then proceed to impacts and long-term impacts. And Dr. Dampi has a presentation. We had requested him to share his reflections on National Mission Sustainable Agriculture. So I believe that he has a presentation on NMSA, and can we request him to proceed now?
Where is that?
Osmi, can you please help?
भैया वहाँ नहीं, आप पीछे से कर लो।
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Sumanji, such an experienced campaigner, laid a wonderful overlay, gave a wonderful overview of the issues and how it has to be handled. My presentation is a little different. I really want to go into the specifics of the National Action Plan, particularly the Sustainable Agriculture Mission, and lay out identify some of the gap areas, which kind of, more or less falls in the ambit of her discussion, what she outlaid. I mean, I'm going to skip these slides, because as you know, the impacts of climate change is more productivity, and both quality and quantity has been affected. So these details I know it's a fairly informed crowd, so I'm not going to really talk about those things. Our soil, livestock, fisheries, and pests and diseases are the important issues which being talked about in the national mission. So this is the overview, the vision of the NMSA, that is National Mission on Sustainable Agriculture, to transform agriculture into climate resilient production systems. This is what we have to watch out for. It talks about, it's not the run-of-the-mill stuff, it talks about the climate resilient production systems. Where are we in this aspect? That's one question we have to really critically look at it and examine the mission statement and the kind of a work outlay which has been projected. That is the vision, and this is the mission, the sustainable agriculture. And the sub-missions under MSA are 4: dryland agriculture, risk management, access to information, and use of biotechnology. And some of the functional areas of this particular mission is research and development, focuses on technologies, products and practices, infrastructure, and capacity building. These are the core elements of the mission as projected. And where are the integrations with other missions, particularly with reference to agriculture, water conservation and management, soil and water conservation, agroforestry, energy pricing, water pump and efficiency. So it kind of, it cuts across all the other missions in many ways because the nature of agriculture is like that. And there are two critical components, and again, it's more centered towards adaptation to climate change, particularly from the adaptation perspective, agriculture being talked about, which is fairly so. This has been elaborated by Dr. Suman Sangha as well. How important is adaptation for agriculture? And approaches to reduce GHG emissions is also being talked about. I'm not going to the details, I'll come to the gaps. So some of the ongoing programs, initiatives, which has been already there, and some of them are newly initiated programs under the climate change mission. These are one of the NPCC, that is the Impacts Adaptation on Indian Agriculture to Climate Change. The national network was launched in 2004, that is even before the National Action Plan came into existence. And some of the elements what you find today in the climate, under the climate mission on agriculture is already been done, it's been going on. And another one is the National Agriculture Innovation Project, NAIP. And NICRA, this National Initiative on Climate Resilient Agriculture. This is fairly new. It started in 2011 January with an outlay of 350 crores. And it is for 2 years, imagine, not even half the money is being spent. To use this story. And I'm not going to, let me straight away go to the gaps. These are some of the strategic institutes which are working on agriculture in India. There are no dearth of institutes in India, absolutely. There is no synergy between these institutes. That's we have to really acknowledge the fact. There are enough knowledge bases here, but absolutely they work in silos. There are islands of excellence, but not really the synergies happening. And capacity buildings, there are certain run-of-the-mill stuff, we have a certain number of scientists trained in this area, and how the mechanics of this has been discussed elaborately, and at the grassroots level, what kind of training is to be given. All these things, these elements are really well outlaid in the plan, but how effective are they in action is the question. So there are technical programs finalized through thematic working groups. These are some of the identified elements for the under the thematic groups. Again, about water, enhancing water productivity through integrated water resources management in various ecosystems. It's a very loosely coined word. It's a huge, all-encompassing statement. But how are we going to do this at the best? So I'll just skip these things. I'll just go to the gaps. So this is the budget outlay. What you see here for technology and products and practices, the maximum allocation is for that, around 60%. And R&D, you see, that's 6%. It's absolutely nothing. Like a country like India, it's a huge agricultural base you have, so 6% is nothing. Capacity building is 5%, and infrastructure is 29%. And additional budgetary support and technology products and practices is around 65,000 crores, and infrastructure including insurance is 31,500 crores, and research and development again is 6,500 crores on the outlay, and capacity building is around 5,000 crores. So altogether it works out to 1,08,000 crores, which is a mammoth budget. We have all the elements outlaid, and how effective it is going to be in terms of allocation is going to be a big question. And this is a huge budget, certainly is no doubt. And talking about the gaps, as Sumanji clearly mentioned, managing uncertainties is a critical question. Right information at the right time is very, very critical for agricultural sector more than any other sector. So, of course, there are certain headways made in terms of the agro advisories, what she talked about, and other things. But still, unless you have the right information, you can't alert the farmers and keep them prepared for doing the business. So it's very important that we invest in the understanding the uncertainties, and we need more finer details. Again, you're talking about downscaling and other things, which is not up to the mark today. So that certainly needs to be focused, and planning should be based on agroclimatic zones. Again, there are passing references about the agroclimatic zones, dependent agriculture and the plants, but it is not really taken shape. Again, what ought to be going in has not been really thought out, good way. And vulnerability assessment, to me, this is very, very critical. Vulnerability assessment of principal crops associated with key agroclimatic zones is totally missing, because we need to have a good mapping of the entire country, what crops are predominant, what areas, how this is going to be affected. So kind of superimpose the climate information on that and try to understand. Otherwise, we can't have a good plan for different agroclimatic zones. Though some passing remarks has been made on that, it's not been really given the attention it deserves. And that should be on local food production for local consumption. This is another thing that total lingo is missing in the whole document. The impacts of bioenergy crops, again, for good or bad, if we don't want, it's going to happen. Food versus fuel debate is really kicking off in a big way. Are we prepared for that? That is another important question you should think of. And research, you have to invest in research, at least at this level now, to study those things. What are the elements that will be affected? What kind of zoning of those bioenergy productive areas? All these things have to be really, you're prepared. Your plan is necessary, which has not been thought out adequately. Conservation aspect should be strengthened. And it is an ongoing process. Again, it is either climate change is there or not. These are very fundamental elements for our survival. Delivery systems have not been focused adequately. Again, you talk about the extension services, upgradation of extension services, and what does it mean to climate resilient agriculture? That's another question. How do you really marry these two? Are the extension officers adequately trained on those aspects? Absolutely nothing. Because I have personally did a scoping exercise with Manage, one of the premier institutes of extension services, to see what kind of curriculum they have and how these new elements would be introduced. I think that needs some serious thinking. Unless the extension services are geared up, it's very difficult to deliver to every village, every nook and corner. So that's very critical. An assessment of the effectiveness of the ongoing program schemes. So also we should learn from what has happened in the past. That is particularly when we talk about adaptation, sense of history is very, very critical. How people have adapted and what kind of situations they faced and what kind of coping strategies what they had. An assessment, the best practices have to be documented. But here and there it is there. It is not under the climate label. Of course, we have done that under the conservation label. But it is important to kind of take stock of those things and start from there. That should be the real base for any new plans and programs. And synergy between mitigation and adaptation is not really understood well. A lot of lip service has been given to this particular phenomenon, but how is going to be effective and what are the modalities to operate this has not been really thought out. And more than extension, farmer to farmer interactions, we have seen how effective are they. That horizontal extension services is very key, and that has not been really given adequate attention. And saving lost crops and traditional wisdom, again, a lot of emphasis has been provided on different forums on these things. But again, it is not really capturing the way it should be. Again, it goes with the best practices what I've been talking about. And no explicit reference to the involvement of PRIs in the NMSA document. That is very, very important. If you're talking about the bottom-up approach, I think it is very important that PRIs get involved in some way or other. So the document is silent on that aspect as well. And the local level climate risk management components, again, a lot of reference been alluded to this fact, weather-based farming is very, very critical. In our own experiences, in a small way, we piloted a project where, in Rajasthan or Andhra Pradesh, where we really looked in this aspect and proved that how handy this could come in terms of increasing the productivity marginally. When empowering the farmers at the rural level to record and kind of take certain critical decisions at their own level is very, very critical. For example, if the wind speed is more than 5 kilometers per hour, if there is a small agromet station installed there in the village, if they could decipher that information, a lot of resources could be saved in terms of the pesticide use, because anything about whatever they're going to spray at that particular day is going to drift away. So this, in terms of saving the resources, is very, very critical. And timely manner, they could use the resources. That's another important. And this post-harvest management is talked about quite widely, for so long. Absolutely, I don't see any kind of improvement there. So I think that enough trust has to be given there, particularly the post-harvest management aspects. Though enough has been said about the need for cross-linkages, there is enough said about the cross-linkages between the institutes as well as the missions. But how part is missing? How are we going to do that? It's one thing to say that this has to be, everybody understands the need for this, but how are we going to do the mechanics have to be really spelled out very clearly. Again, as I already said, inter-institutional linkages are very critical in agricultural aspects, but how are we going to do the operate in silos? And one of the examples is the National Rainfed Authority, which has been established. What is the role of it? What it has really achieved so far? That is another question to really think about. So I'm just, this is points to ponder. I'm not giving any kind of solutions, but what missing links, I'm just trying to highlight those things. Again, it's interesting to see as a part of the water mission, there is a proposal to optimize water use through market regulations, including pricing, that is differential entitlement pricing. This means, it might lead to kind of privatization of water resources and market-friendly regulations, use of natural resources. What does it mean to the poor man? This is a very critical question. One has to really think about it. The principle of differential entitlement will act against the interests of farming community. I just want to flag these things. One solution for these things, but one should be cognizant of these facts. And so, in my opinion, these are some of these very significant action areas: increase in adaptive capacity, which I touched upon before, strengthening institutions, particularly the knowledge base, database management. There should be free flow of information from meteorological department, agriculture department to water department. That has to be really addressed. And mitigation of GSGs. Again, how are we going to, particularly livestock is one of the things, but we have been successful in proving that livestock is not a big menace in India, particularly in terms of methane emissions. There's been enough scientific evidence gathered and it's been accepted by the international community to a large extent than what it was some 10 years back. And policy development and implementation, again, we have marine agriculture being a state subject, it's a lot of other things goes with the baggage, we have to really address those issues. And center states dialogue should take place on this particular thing, how to deal with this thing. Again, we are living in an information age. The access to information is very, very critical. How are we going to leverage this through the ICT-based systems? That is very, very important. There are enough evidences in the country, but then how are we going to really put them into productive use is a big question. We could do wonders with that, but it is important, critical to realize, and the government takes the steps in a mission, or they should work on a mission mode to achieve this. And again, I'm of the opinion that different strategies for different categories of farmers have to be devised. It is not a one blanket policy for everybody. Large farmers should have a different kind of, the government should think in a different way, particularly looking at the commercial farmers, the trade aspects, how they could regulate them and other things. Emerging smallholders in the market-oriented approach, particularly in the advent of this bioenergy crops and other things, is this going to get really complicated. I'm talking about some 10 years from now or so. So one has to really be proactive about these things. What kind of policies will benefit them? What kind of policy will affect them? This analysis should be there. Thought process should be initiated. And traditional farmers, mainly subsistence farmers, are they going to be remaining there? And climate change means to them? How are we going to really address those issues? And there should be separate kind of an approach to the landless and farm laborers. So these are some of the broad aspects, I thought I will kind of flag those issues. There's nothing concrete which has come out of it, but I thought I'll go see through the material and see where the gaps are, and I thought it's appropriate to present it and take it further.
Thank you, Dr. Dambi. आई एम श्योर कि यहाँ जितने लोग बैठे हुए हैं एग्रीकल्चर पे जो बातचीत हुई है, बहुत लोगों के दिमाग में बहुत सारे सवाल उठे होंगे और देयर इज अ स्कोप फॉर अ वेरी वाइड and relevant discussion on agriculture and food security in this context. It's very surprising that we have been talking about agriculture and food security and climate negotiations. And in the domestic actions, what we find is a National Mission on Sustainable Agriculture. We have been looking at Mission on Agriculture and different state action plans. They are more closer to what is coming from international negotiations and mitigation focus than closer to realities. And I find that there is little concern for agriculture in the plans, but there is no concern for farmers at all. There is a complete disconnect between how we are looking at agriculture minus farmers in the Indian context. And obviously, Mr. Nambi has been part of sort of official delegations and have been, and the Swaminathan Research Foundation has been on so many committees and panels on agriculture and food security. I hope that you have a greater peep in government's mind than us, and if you can little elaborate on what is the government thinking about mitigation focus in agriculture and the techno fixes and mitigation focused solutions that are being provided in the international negotiations. It's very unfortunate that none of the developing countries have been able to see through that design, which is entirely mitigation focused. The UNFCCC is under huge pressure in COP17, I guess, to have a work program on agriculture by Substa, and that might further lead to more pressure on the negotiations to adopt soil carbon sequestration as CDM approved technology. And who is going to benefit from that? All of us understand sort of. So if you can little elaborate on that. I'm sorry for changing. Yeah.
I'll suggest that because those two presentations are there, a lot of people might have something to either add or question or critique even.
Yes,
that will be a better process of going around on this, because both Sumanji and Sunil will be leaving.
So how do we do it? Can I request you to moderate the reflections of people?
More than moderation, I think a lot of people, आप लोगों का ये दोनों presentation Sumanji का, as she said, more informal, free flowing, and Nambi का presentation formal. सुनने के बाद लोगों को कुछ सवाल भी होगा, कुछ inputs भी होगा, उसको कोई critique करना चाहे. I think we should go about that in a very clear fashion, so that the meaning of a round table is to collect the understandings from as large a base as possible. Can somebody start? Shripadji can.
Yeah. Well, one thing I just wanted to share with you, to put the perspective right, is that I'm thankful to Dr. Sahai and Nambi for making some very valid points, and also what Ajay ji said, agriculture minus farmer. You know, in the context of food security, unfortunately, in the whole country there is no small farmer security now. There is a small farmer security is under great threat, unprecedented threat. So even without taking into consideration this climate crisis. So I think as far as seeing from farmers' point of view, there is a greater danger waiting for farming and food security, so that the climate crisis becomes a non-issue for the farmer, from farmers' perspective. Changes are happening. Farmers are not able to relate everything, and also the society outside and the media is ignoring many issues that are very crucial. Let me give one small example this year. You know, much has been said about this change of rain pattern and all that. You know, what are the implications? Apart from sowing, getting crop and other things, some things which is completely not focused is the changing rains and its impact. This year, for example, what is the total loss? And I have a small perspective. It is not, I can't speak for whole of South India. I have a small perspective. If rains come in summer, when the farmer has to dry the crop, there is no way he can protect the crop, and the losses are colossal. Let me use a very small example. This year, one Karnataka farmer came out with a very small, low-cost dryer. It became so instant hit. He was even offered plane tickets from Assam because Assam. They said, you don't know the kind of economical loss we are facing here. Our tea is actually getting fungus. So would you come and give us solutions? Our established organizations are not in a position to give a fast solution to this. Like what Nambiji told, managing the uncertainties. That's a main issue. And there is no pattern of the changing rain pattern. So I think we have to view the whole thing in this one. One thing what is highly disturbing, what I see in rural areas, in areas of water, there is enough water security. In areas where there is climate security to a certain extent, like heavy rainfall areas of our Karnataka and Kerala, the small farming is under great threat. And go to any village, many traditional farms are either sold or listed for sale. I think this sustainable farming focus has become out of focus and gone back to the back seat, and sustaining farming has become the major issue. I think I will stop with that.
I have a request from the chair. If there are no questions directly addressed to me, I'd like to be able to leave.
Okay. Anyone? Please. सुमन जी के हम लोग एक तरीके से बहुत समय से क्लब में फॉलोअर रहे हैं। जो बात वो कहती हैं उसको समझने की भी हम लोग कोशिश करते हैं और अपने इलाके में लागू करने की भी कोशिश करते हैं। लेकिन आज सुमन जी ने अपनी बात जो पूरी तरीके से खाद्य सुरक्षा को जोड़ के रखी थी, उसमें एक दो चीज मैं चाहूँगा कि अगर वो स्पष्ट करें। एक बात तो जब उन्होंने बात करी थी बीटी कॉटन और बीटी ब्रिंजल की, और एक तरीके से हम लोगों ने इस पर हमेशा से एक रुख लिया था अपनी स्टेट के भीतर भी कि इसको हम अपने यहाँ लागू नहीं होने देंगे, और वो लागू नहीं भी हो पाया था। लेकिन आज थोड़ा सा बदलाव मैं देख रहा था आपकी बात में कि आपने जब कहा था कि हम आज इसके बारे में बिल्कुल स्पष्ट तरीके से अपनी बात को नहीं रख सकते हैं कि ये सही है या गलत है, तो एक चीज़ तो थोड़ा सा आपको ये समझनी थी। दूसरी बात, आपने एक बात ये कही थी कि पूरा सरकार को एक सिस्टम बनाना चाहिए, जिस तरीके का ये एग्जाम्पल उन्होंने दिया कि वर्षा जिस तरीके से हो रही है उसकी सूचना जो है लोगों तक पहुँच सके। तो इसमें भी दो चीजें थी। एक तो इस तरीके का जो सिस्टम है वो कितना सही है, एक बात तो ये थी। दूसरी बात ये थी कि जब इस सिस्टम को हम देखते हैं कि कुछ खास जगहों पर तो ये सिस्टम होता है, लेकिन जैसे कि मैं अपने जिले का उदाहरण दूं, मैं नैनीताल जिले के भीतर अगर काम कर रहा हूँ और नैनीताल जिले के जिन गाँव की सूचनाएं हमको चाहिए वो सूचनाएं तो कहीं उपलब्ध होती नहीं है। वो एक बड़ा कस्बा, मान लीजिए कि हल्द्वानी एक बड़ा इलाका होता है, वहां तक की सूचना तो उपलब्ध होती है, लेकिन जैसे जैसे अंदर को जाते हैं वो सूचनाएं तो उपलब्ध होती ही नहीं है। तब फिर कैसे किस तरीके से लोगों को जो है उसके बारे में अवेयर किया जा सकता है?
ये जो आपका दूसरा सवाल का हम पहले जवाब देते हैं, जो ये जानकारी मिलती है ये मोटी जानकारी है। बिना जानकारी की स्थिति और इस मोटी जानकारी की स्थिति में जो फर्क है उसका फायदा उठाना है। अभी भी हम मानसून के आने का इतनी ज्यादा एक्यूरेटली नहीं बता पाते, उतनी टेक्नोलॉजी अभी तक विकसित हुई नहीं, तो एक चौड़े बड़े इलाके का बता पाते हैं। जिस तरह की टेक्नोलॉजी, जिस तरह की मॉडलिंग संभव है इस वक्त, उससे जितना फायदा उठाया जा सके, और वो कोई इतना भी ज्यादा मोटा नहीं है। जैसे अगर आप नैनीताल जिले में हैं तो नैनीताल जिले का एक आपको मिलेगा वेदर एडवाइजरी जो है, और वो मोटी उस इलाके के लिए सही होगा। गांव की एडवाइजरी तो संभव कहीं भी नहीं होगी और कभी भी नहीं हो पाएगी शायद, लेकिन मोटी इतना बुरा भी नहीं है, कोई बहुत ही ज्यादा एक्यूरेट भी नहीं है, इतना बुरा भी नहीं है। रही मेरा जो कहना था जीएम क्रॉप्स के ऊपर या बीटी कपास या बीटी ब्रिंजल के ऊपर, हम ये स्पष्ट करने की कोशिश कर रहे थे कि मेरा कोई उससे आइडियोलॉजी की पोजीशन नहीं है कि हम बुनियादी तौर पे इसकी मुखालफत करते हैं या हम बुनियादी तौर पे इसका समर्थन करते हैं, ऐसा नहीं है। वैज्ञानिक होने के नाते हमें बहुत सी आपत्तियां दिखती हैं इस टेक्नोलॉजी में। तो मेरी जो स्थिति है तब भी यही थी, मेरी जो पोजीशन थी तब भी यही थी और आज भी यही है कि इस टेक्नोलॉजी को आज की तारीख में लेबोरेटरी में होना चाहिए, किसानों के खेतों में नहीं, क्योंकि अभी भी ये कच्ची है, अभी भी इसकी बहुत सी चीजें हैं जिसको कि हम नहीं समझ पाए हैं और आगे शोध करने की जरूरत है। शोध करके शायद इसका जवाब मिले और शायद इसका जवाब ना भी मिले। अगर जवाब 5 साल की शोध के बाद और 10 साल की शोध के बाद नहीं मिलता है तो ये उचित होगा कि इस चीज को बंद कर दिया जाए। ऐसा दुनिया की और जगहों में हुआ है और अगर जवाब मिलता है तो बड़ी अच्छी बात है। वैज्ञानिक होने के नाते हम आपको ये कह सकते हैं कि ये जो टेक्नोलॉजी है इसमें अभी बहुत सी कमियां हैं। तो मेरी स्थिति तब भी यही थी, आज भी।
Yeah, my name is Nagraj. Just a brief question. कई इलाकों में सुनने को आता है डॉक्टर साहब कि लोग जो है जलवायु परिवर्तन के संदर्भ में वापस पारंपरिक बीज के इस्तेमाल करने शुरू किए हैं। मैं आपसे ये पूछना चाह रहा था कि as a geneticist and as somebody who's been an activist for so long, my question is to what degree is it possible to use traditional genes, traditional seeds in a local area, or is it also possible to use it wider in different ecological contexts? You know, the reason I'm asking that is, I think one thing that's very important for organizations like all of ours is to find out what works and what doesn't work. And I think to find out what works in an adaptation change by farmers, how is it to talk about elsewhere? How is it possible to reproduce it elsewhere? So my question is, how wide, in your experience, how widely is it possible actually?
You know, the question of traditional varieties has importance because traditional varieties were many, and they were many because they were saved and conserved for very different kinds of situations. And that is why you will find traditional varieties that are drought tolerant, that are salt tolerant, that are short maturing, that are long maturing, that can withstand so-and-so condition, that cannot withstand so-and-so condition. So for traditional farmers, yield was not the only property they selected for. That is why traditional varieties then and traditional varieties today are your best bet for distributing risk. Now, in the time of climate change, your biggest problem is going to be uncertainty. You're not good, and if you can have floods in Jaisalmer, you can have pretty much any kind of a situation. The greater your repertoire of varieties, the better chances you have of finding something that will suit that condition. Suddenly you're overcome by flood. In your repertoire of traditional varieties, it's likely that you'll have a flood tolerant variety. So likewise also drought tolerant. That is the importance of retaining traditional varieties and why they are coming back into favor to cope with the uncertainty. Now, how widely applicable are these? I think that the wide application would depend on matching circumstance. If you take the rice growing areas, the rice growing areas of the east would be more or less similar. So if you take, starting up there, if you take, don't take the northeast because northeast becomes climatically very different. You're able to take 3 rice crops. But say West Bengal downwards, if you come down, all the way up to Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand, Odisha, etc. The conditions are reasonably similar. You will have in all of these areas the distinction from the upland fields to the medium land fields to the lowland fields. Now, lowland varieties that will grow in Bengal will probably also do just as well in Chhattisgarh. Its conditions are very similar. You would not probably be able to transport this into, say, Tamil Nadu or Karnataka in the rice growing areas or in Kerala, because there not only does the other things change, but light conditions will also change. The photoperiodic sensitivity of certain varieties, etc. I think there is potential now for doing a greater mapping exercise and a matching exercise using technologies to see what matches in terms of traditional varieties using GIS. If you're able to map with GIS, you would be able to say, okay, these conditions are replicated in these 25 locations. And this variety could be adapted to these 25 locations also. So here is an intervention of a new technology that could further take the advantages that you have of the genetic diversity of traditional crops. So,
I'm Darish from Governance Now. Your analysis makes it clear, that one, the policy, the National Action Plan is ignorant, about what farmers are looking for. And secondly, it has also not heard of what the NGOs and people, experts have been saying. They want to ask you that what do you think is the driving force here then? Because there will be people within the government also who must have told the government, the panel, that this is wrong in, the GM variety is immature, it should be in the laboratory and not in the field. Even then we have this such a plan here. So what exactly is the driving force behind the document?
it's a question that I'm not able to answer. I think it's probably a mixture of the kind of policy making we do in this country. You sit in Delhi and a bunch of people come together, and this bunch of people who think they know everything and don't actually get together, and you'll call the joint secretary of so-and-so and the additional secretary of such and such and the director of so-and-so and put them together, and that bunch of dunderheads will put together something on textbook knowledge about what is happening in agriculture, and some planning commission document will be pulled out, and then you'll say, oh, okay, look at page number so-and-so of Palla's report, then he says this and that, so we should build that into it. That's more or less how policy is being made. And that is why it is so totally standing on its head. But there are other driving forces in that, there may be, maybe not, but I think that we don't give sufficient attention to policy making in this area. However, if there had to be a policy discussion on electronics, you would have all the leaders of industry sitting there, you would have them coming into lunches and dinners all the time over formal and informal discussions. We get thrashed in the agriculture sector. So, policy making in this country is bad because it is not distributive, it is not inclusive. That's a relic of Sahab Logs making the policy for us natives, and we've just taken that on board. And many, many years of participatory democracy are having an impact. I won't say that we're as bad as we were 20 years ago. That whole paternalistic way of policy making is certainly changing. I mean, I'm not subscribing to this loony fringe and all of this Anna business saying, I'll write the law and you follow it. I don't subscribe to that kind of participatory democracy either. But yes, I think even that movement is trying to say that, you have to listen to us. And people say it in different ways. They're saying it in one way. Other people have tried to say it in different ways. But I think we're getting there. I'm not pessimistic. I'm optimistic. I think we're still making fairly rotten policies. But I think that the government is getting opener and opener to listen to views. A lot of times we don't get up and say what we should be saying. I mean, civil society also is amazingly lazy. And civil society, in many, many instances, thinks that sloganeering is a substitute for hard work. Because if you want to provide inputs into government policy, you have to work and understand that and develop something that will not have you laughed out of the room. So we're also very often short. We need to do more homework. We need to work harder. The government is getting more responsive. When it is not responsive, we have to bop them on the head now and then.